Welcome to Shades of Us, the show that looks at a person's journey when it comes to race and self-identity. I'm Susan Junn. In this episode, we'll explore the stories of three people who are children of interracial marriages originating from the military and creating some meaningful works. I myself come from a multiracial family. My father came from South Korea to study and earn his PhD, and while doing so, he met my white American mother, whose ancestors hailed from Ireland and Scotland. My multiracial background has always served as a source of pride and inspiration for me, much as it does for our first subject, an actor and writer who creates a one-woman show. Here's Juliette Fairley.
I am the daughter of an African-American war hero and his French war bride. My mother and my father met in France during the Reconstruction following World War II. The historical context of World War II interracial marriages was you had many African-American soldiers who were in the military, who were stationed in France. They weren't super rich the way we think of today, but they had money.
Americans, they are everywhere and they have lots of money. We love the Americans.
When my father got there, he said he was so stunned and he felt so sad for them. He had never seen white people down and out like this, ever. It was always the black people in America that were down and out. After I was born on a military base outside of Paris in Châteauroux, France, we then subsequently moved back to the United States.
We drive from Massachusetts to Texas, stopping along the way for a good night's sleep and food and water. When we get to the southern states, well, that's still living by Jim Crow.
I was walking down the street once. I was 9 years old in San Antonio and on Canyon Ridge, which is where our house was, and the first time I ever heard the word nigger. I mean, I was so stunned. I was like, I'm a nigger. Because, my mother is white, she's blonde and blue-eyed. My dad is black. When I realized at that point that I was a nigger too, in the eyes of the community, I was really stunned. My mother had really fine, straight hair, and I had curly hair. And she had a hard time combing it.
Ow, I am exhausted.
Hey. Just put a rubber band in it. It's not that complicated.
She was constantly frustrated with my hair. She didn't know what to do with it. And then I would look in the mirror and be like, no, this is not the way it's supposed to be, Then she would just cut it off. It was like I just can't deal with this. Being part of an interracial family during that time, 70s, 80s, was in Texas. There were instances where my mother and I would be at the store checking out, like waiting for the grocery store, and some clerk would say, "Oh, is that your daughter?" And my mother was like, "Yeah, straight from my vagina." My father always encouraged me to develop my talents, because my father was always really big about African Americans, people of color, needing a trade. I said to him, I want to write books, I want to write novels. And he was like, well, that's fine, but you have to get a job. I'm not taking care of you forever. My senior year, I submitted to all these internships across the country. And I got accepted by the best one, which was New York Newsday. I met other people of color that were interning, and they told me, they schooled me. They said, you should go to journalism school. All you had to do back then to get into Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism was write an essay, and I could do that. I had won awards in Texas for writing. So I wrote an essay, I got in. After graduating from journalism school in the 90s, I got a job at Black Enterprise magazine, and I became the personal finance section editor. And Black Enterprise at the time was huge. It was a magazine about African Americans who were moving and shaking, usually because of these programs that the government had put into place to help African Americans get on their feet as business people. As I was working at Black Enterprise magazine, I started making connections there. I started freelancing for the New York Times and a couple of other publications, Bloomberg Business News. And I ended up leaving Black Enterprise after a year and just becoming a full-time freelancer, which freed me up to do my auditioning as an actress, to take classes, and to have a freer lifestyle to pursue more creative endeavors. So I started taking classes with Wynn Hanman, who trained Alec Baldwin, Denzel Washington, Rachel Weisz, and a couple of other celebrities. And so he was the teacher to kind of study with. You interview with him, and I told him what my background was. And the first year it was just basic plays, and then he wanted me to do performances, monologues from French plays like Molière. So I started doing my monologues in French and then English. And that really helped me to tap into who I was. He then encouraged me to do monologues from Nella Larsen's passing. Nella Larsen was an African-American biracial author back in the 1920s. And then he started encouraging me to do little pieces of my childhood because he knew there was something there. I became more confident because of that class.
I have a question. How dark is your dad again? Is he Mexican dark or Brazilian dark?
He's Afro-dark, Dan. He's a descendant of slaves. I told you that. The substance and the context of the stage play Mulatto Saga as it is today is my childhood, my parents' relationship, how they met, and it progresses to my life, and it progresses to our life together, and then it progresses to how being in the American South impacted my parents' relationship and impacted my life. And I played all the parts.
Glory be, hallelujah, saints. I think I heard it say husband, saints. I thought I heard it say husband, saints. Time to serve the change in saints.
When I performed at New York, it was reviewed in the New York Times in 2010, and it got a really bad review. In my opinion, it was very critical. When I went out to LA, I fell in step with Charles Burnett. And Charles Burnett is a film director. He was a generation before Spike Lee and John Singleton. He did directed a film called Killer of Sheep.
You are not a child anymore. You soon will be a goddamn man. Now, start learning what life is about now.
He brought out the African-American angle. He said, what did your dad tell you? Or ask your dad. My dad was alive at the time. Ask your dad about his relationship with his mother. So after I got this body of work as a 90-page stage play with the help of Charles Burnett, I then did a series of short films based on the stage play. The first one was Mulatto Saga. Then there was Juliette Fairley's Mulatto's Dilemma. And then there was Mulatto Diaries. And then there was Diary of a Mulatto Bride. In the press release, I had said something about how there were not enough roles for biracial people in Hollywood. And what I meant by that was that there are not movies or television projects where you have one white parent and one black parent. And so it was mistaken to say that biracials in Hollywood don't get any roles. And then, you know, their criticism was they get all the roles. They get all the roles of the black parents, and the black people don't get any roles. But that was taken out of context. I was trying to say that there's not enough interracial families being reflected. One of the reasons that I created Mulatto Saga and put it out on the market is so that biracial children could actually play biracial characters. I mean, I've played all kinds, Asian, Hispanic, Black. It's like very rarely do I play a biracial person. So my stage play is an attempt to offer that opportunity. And I hope that younger people will embrace it and perform it after I'm gone, you know, and it's one way to leave a piece of history.
You're about to meet Alex Laughlin, a media entrepreneur who produces a biracial-focused podcast.
In 2016, during the presidential election, I remember feeling really frustrated because it felt like the only things you could be in an argument or in a conversation about race were black or white. I produced the show, it's called Other, and it came out in May of 2017. It was a 5-episode series, a show about multiracial identity. My mother is Korean. She was born and raised in Korea and immigrated to the US in her early 20s. And my dad is white, born and raised in Kansas. My dad was in the Army, and he was stationed in Korea, and that's how they met on base. I think that my father really valued the Korean culture that I had in me, and he wanted me to be able to see it and appreciate it. I remember growing up and he would force me to eat kimchi, and I hated it so much. I hated kimchi. And my mom never made me eat kimchi, but my dad did, and he said that it was because he wanted me to develop a taste for it. I grew up with my mom and my stepdad, who she married when I was 3. He's very much been a part of my life, and he's also in the Army. I spent about 5 years of my childhood in Hawaii. We lived on the military base there. One of the main things that shaped my experience of growing up in Hawaii was being called a haole. That means they're calling you white. It didn't feel good. But I think that there's really important context there to consider, which is that Hawaii was its own nation that was colonized by the US, and people who have been on that land for generations and generations, who feel like their land is being taken over by people who have flown there to enjoy and consume the land and the experience, but then leave because they're not actually from there. That attitude is really ingrained into the community there. My mom would always say, "You're so American, you are so white." Because to her, her child who grew up in this country is very American, is very white. And so I, growing up, always kind of felt like, oh yeah, my mom is Korean, but that doesn't mean I am. I remember in elementary school believing that I was white because I was the whitest kid in my class. And when we moved to Kansas, I realized that, oh yeah, I am Korean, and that means that I am not completely white. In middle school or in high school, people would make jokes. They would be like, oh, Alex gets good grades. Alex, you should be good at math, you're Asian. And I would play along with it because it made me feel special in some way, which is a sick middle school thing that happens, I think, for a lot of people of color. They play along with stereotypes because it makes them feel like they're owning it rather than being judged. In high school, I discovered a radio show called This American Life. I just loved that I could hear, a teenage girl's voice in my ears telling me about the problems she's having with her mother. And I could relate to that. And it felt amazing that these stories that are so intimate and sometimes feel so small were considered important enough to be broadcast all over the country. Serial had happened. The podcast boom was starting. And so I just decided, I was like, I'm gonna start my own show and I'm gonna learn how to do this. So I started a podcast called The Ladycast, which at the time was a pretty radical concept, interviews with women about their careers. And it culminated in my first live show in DC in 2016. And as I was doing that, I was also reading voraciously, trying to figure out, like, how do people make things for the ear? I decided to pitch a podcast idea to my current employer, the Washington Post. They didn't really have any podcasts at the time, and they were just dipping their toe into things. And I said, hey, I would love to make a show about multiracial identity. So I spent the next year and a half reading everything I could about multiracial identity, going deep into the academic archives and reading fiction and listening to music and watching films, and talking to a lot of people about what it means to them to be mixed and what it means to them to live in a country that is inherently mixed. I did ask my mom to come on a show called The Big Listen, which is a national NPR podcast. And I asked her to come on to talk about race and my racial anxiety and how she feels about me telling the story. And she really didn't want to do it. And I eventually talked her into it, and I'm really grateful that she came on because, you know, I also wanted to give her space to tell her own story. So many people have reached out to me and continue to reach out to me, thanking me for telling stories that they didn't see told anywhere else. For all of my work, I think my audience is probably a version of myself. I often feel like it's incredibly self-indulgent to talk about my mixed race identity as a problem or something that I feel angst about because, see, I'm like even doing it right now. I feel very eye-rolly about it sometimes because it feels like complaining that you're left-handed, which I am, or complaining that your parents are divorced, which mine are, but it feels like one of those things that people like to raise their hand and be like, I'm special because of this. I think that I am hopefully on my way to becoming a person who is at peace with not fitting into tidy boxes. For me, that just happens to be my race. But you know, for other people, it's gender, class, or sexuality. I want my work to always speak to people who, like me, are looking for answers, who are looking for a way to think about themselves, conceptualize themselves in the world that isn't just like, I'm this or I'm that.
You heard of the New York Renaissance? See how Claude Johnson rediscovers the lost history of early African-American basketball players.
I think that my dad wanted to make sure that we also were protected from the negative feelings associated with blindly adopting an identity too early. My dad, as an African-American man from the south side of Chicago, he was in the military, assigned over to Germany, West Germany at the time. And that's where he met my mom, who was German, in a jazz club on the south side of Frankfurt, Germany. They met and eventually got married and had 5 kids, and 4 of us were born in Europe. And so, you know, his parents had to escape lynchings in the northern part of Louisiana in the early 1910s. And there was a surge of lynchings there, and actually, if you look at the data, the 5 counties with the highest number of lynchings in our country were all in northern Louisiana and southern Arkansas. It's a really dangerous area to live. And so when they came north to Chicago, my grandfather, his dad, never learned how to read or write. He became a Pullman porter, and that was what he did for the rest of his career. He retired as a Pullman porter. For my dad to then get a PhD out of that sequence was really unheard of. It was amazing, astonishing. But to his credit, he never shared with us some of this history that I just explained. I had to do that research myself. He was teaching us about Paul Robeson and Frederick Douglass. I just never remember us ever talking about a person's race. He was very vocal and knowledgeable about African-American history and different heroes, but we didn't really specifically talk about whether that person was black or white or German. We just talked about, this is why that person was great. The year that my parents moved us to the United States was 1966. It was also difficult, even though it was Boston, to be coming into that city or a suburb of that city with a mixed race family. But it was actually great. I remember when we first moved in, like the day we moved in, the moving truck, you know, we unloaded, and all of us, so again, there's 5 of us kids, we all got our bikes out of the truck and we rolled down the street. And I remember very specifically our neighbors, the kids from these neighbors from the neighborhood saying, get out of here, as we rolled down the street. But I also remember about a few weeks later, or maybe it was a few months later, we were all best friends. Playing baseball, sport culture united everybody. So I really like basketball. It's action. It's always, the crowd is into it. There's always something going on every play. Started to like the game, although, I wasn't really that great at it, but I was a good learner. Then I started to realize, when I went to my high school that, to like the game and to play the game well is two different things. I got a post at the NBA. My first job there was Director of International Operations. When the league celebrated its 50th anniversary, they published a book called the NBA Encyclopedia of Basketball. It was an 800-page book, probably 4 inches thick, but it only had 3 pages devoted to early African-American basketball teams. And there were 2 teams. The Harlem Globetrotters, which most people knew about, and I've watched them on TV. They were kind of like the comedy version of the game in a good way, because it helped stoke the imaginations of kids in terms of what to do with the basketball. And the New York Renaissance Big Five, which was also a competitive team back then. But I knew that there were more than these 2 teams because I had bought this book by Arthur Ashe, the tennis legend, that came out right around that time, called A Hard Road to Glory, the journey of the African-American athlete from the 1600s to the present. And in the basketball section of that book, he listed several dozen African-American teams that went back to the turn of the century. They really sort of fired up my own imagination because I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And one of the teams that he listed was the Smart Set Athletic Club of Brooklyn, an all-black athletic social club that was formed in 1904. Since I was in licensing and I lived in Brooklyn, I thought, wouldn't it be cool one day to have that name on a t-shirt? Because nobody would know what that was, and it would just start a story. It would just start a conversation. So I began chronicling that history and began to realize there's a parallel universe of African-American players, teams, contributors, fans, venues that existed back then. So most people know about the Negro Leagues of Baseball, which is fascinating on its own. But very few people realized that there was this other basketball universe. And so that's where my journey began. I started to realize, okay, somebody has to tell this story. I looked around, nobody else was. So I felt like it might as well be me. My journey and the journey of creating this organization, the Black Fives Foundation, is that on a personal level, I've just always felt through my ancestors who were sharecroppers and struggled to get out of the South and make a life in the North and beyond. I've always felt a kinship to that history that they would always talk about, which was in large part lost. So I always felt that, giving a voice to the voiceless was my mission. I love saying that basketball is bigger than basketball. So when you look at this history, the history of the Black Fives era of basketball, it's really beyond just the African-American history, and it's beyond just the basketball history. It's American history. When I started this, it was to sort of prove my basketball authenticity in a way. And I feel like I've done that, but I feel like I never really had to do that in the first place. So I've sort of become this person who I know what I know. I have a love affair with what I'm doing. I feel that I was born to do this. It's an obligation, and yet there's so much more for others to pick up, for me to pass the baton to.
That's our show for today. To learn more about the people you just saw, log on to our website at tv.cuny.edu. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Shades of Us.